And hello, Hearts of Oak. Thank you so much for joining us once again. And it's great to have a guest who was with us, it seems like a lifetime ago, and that is the one and only Seth Gruber. Seth, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Peter. Appreciate you.
Not all. I've been enthralled by your book, The 1916 Project. This is it. With one of the best subtitles, The Lion, the Witch, and the War We're In, that I love. I think I read the Narnia series 4 or 5 times as a kid, and that was my absolute favorite set of books as a kid. So it is a great tagline on it. So was that
the only
AI
thing
or
is,
your brilliance?
I have to pronounce it so technically, or it sounds like I'm talking about like an actual lion. So I have to say The Lion, the Witch, and the War We're In. But yeah.
I'll go The Lion. We'll go with that.
Yeah.
But fantastic book. I obviously follow Seth. There is his handle on X on Twitter. SethGruber.com is the website. I think Seth Gruber official may be Instagram, something like that.
Yeah, that's right.
So yeah, make sure and follow Seth. Obviously, someone who has been a pro-lifer since he was a fetus, as he puts in on everything. So a long time, and why wouldn't you be? But this is an exceptional book. The links are in the description. I am just over a third the way through it, and it is a fascinating book because it goes through the timeline, the background of where we currently are in terms of the attack on life. And Seth goes through from the history to explain why we are where we are, which is an essential part of fighting it in the future, to know where we have been. But maybe, Seth, you and some fantastic endorsements. You have Kirk Cameron, Jack Hibbs, Eric Metaxas. You've got who else? Nick. I never know how to pronounce Nick's second name. Nick
Vujicic.
There you go, Vujicic. There you go. A wonderful advocate for Christ and life. Someone who is disabled, no arms and no legs, and yet speaks on the joy of life. But maybe the beginning. You start off in the introduction, your background in school, going to a Christian school, and the school not being pro-life. And I think maybe our viewers and listeners may think, if it's a Christian school, it will be pro-life. But that was not your experience growing up.
Yeah, well, so that was from my college years. So I was actually homeschooled through 8th grade. Then I went to public high school. And I did my senior project on the issue of abortion. And that was sort of a turning point for me. I threatened to sue my high school as a senior because they said I couldn't pick the topic of abortion. And that's a public high school. And so that's viewpoint discrimination. So I threatened to sue them at 18. And they backed off real quick. And then I went to a fake Christian college in Santa Barbara, California, down the street from Oprah's house. And I discovered that this wasn't a college full of a bunch of like-minded professors who just thought that we should absolutely ban abortion, never vote for Obama because, we have to protect the babies. No, it turns out over 60% of the faculty, according to a study there, voted for Obama both terms. So over half of the faculty. And then I discovered, as the president of the first pro-life club that had ever existed on campus, that there were pro-abortion professors on the faculty, several of them. Some of them are still there. And so I raised holy hell and caused a big scene. And I ended up holding aborted baby photo signs outside of the dining commons as a junior to show the student body and the college what they were in approval and in agreement with through their refusal to take a position on abortion, and then secondly, their refusal to fire the pro-abortion professors on the faculty. So the reason I tell that story is because I've taken all those lessons with me today, and it's become as sort of the culture of my organization, the White Rose Resistance, which is one, sometimes all you need to do is stand up and tell people to sit down and tell the children to go back into the nursery and the adults are going to take over now. And we have a bunch of petulant, childish leftists in this country, in America, who just need to be told to go back into the nursery. And sometimes when enough people stand up, Satan sits down. And then secondly, the problem is not necessarily like a bunch of evil people out there doing evil things. I learned at my Christian college that the problem is good people who love the Lord and know better, who are cowards and who won't stand against this culture of death. And so over here in America, we're celebrating that Jezebel fell from her tower, and that we were spared 4 years of a Jezebel administration.
It's interesting because I think it was your post talking about why you voted for President Trump, that weirdly, he's not really a pro-life individual. And yet, obviously, through the overturning of Roe versus Wade going back to the States, you've got a change in the whole dialogue and a hope going back to the States. But then you look at the alternative with Kamala, and it's a no-brainer. I mean, did you get flack for that? Because it is a binary choice. You've one or the other, and Trump is certainly a lot better than Kamala if it's just on the life issue.
Oh yeah, I got flack from a lot of pro-life people. There's a lot of pro-life people in the movement, Peter, that are very confusing. They're sort of like political purists. I call them navel gazers, but I call them actually kind of like Pilate, who when the messiness of politics comes to his house, people in America and the church like to just kind of wash their hands of the whole political affair and the political realities on the ground and say, I don't have anything to do with that. I don't have anything to do with that, and just completely remove themselves. And if enough Christians had taken that approach last Tuesday, then we would have been insured a Kamala victory, actually. And so listen, I understand there wasn't a pro-life candidate. Trump continues to say stupid pro-choice nonsense, and I hold him accountable for that, and I rip a new one when he deserves it. In fact, I've lost donors because they think that I shouldn't have been so critical of Trump leading up to the election, because they say, well, it's creating voter hesitancy, right? You're through your criticisms of Trump, you're getting other people to say, oh, Seth's right, he's not perfect on some of these issues and the life issues, so I'm just not going to vote at all. And I never told anyone not to do that, but I said we need to hold him accountable to stand true to his initial promises from 2016 on protecting the unborn. But also we have to do whatever we can to avoid a Kamala Harris administration and presidency. And so, yeah, there's a lot we could talk about there, but I don't understand it. It's sort of, it's this strange kind of self-righteous piety that says, if I vote for Trump, I'm therefore in agreement with everything he says and does. And because he said pro-choice things recently, if I vote for him, then I'm okay with killing the babies that he's okay with killing up to a certain gestational age. And that's just not the case. I didn't pick the nominee. Okay. I preferred DeSantis originally. But here we are. Okay. And it's going to be one or the other. And one is going to lead to a lot more dead babies and a lot more chemically castrated and sexually mutilated minors, and more pro-life sidewalk counselors thrown in prison, and more kids kidnapped from their homes because of their non-gender affirming parents. The other is going to get rid of most, or if not all of that, and probably be an agnostic on the abortion issue, meaning Trump's not going to he's probably not going to give us pro-life victories. But well, maybe through court appointments, but he's also not going to attack the unborn. He'll probably just kind of shrug his shoulders and go, it's up to the states. So that's a much better situation for us as we move to protect life, and as we try to wake up the church to take her back her role on these issues.
Or completely. Well, one of the individuals who endorsed the book, Jack Hibbs, and I've from afar enjoyed his teaching, certainly during the COVID tyranny, and watched that, and someone who hadn't come across before. And you mentioned in your thanks to him, whenever he invited you to speak at his church, What was that like? Because we kind of think it's one or the other. It's an engagement in church, on congregations, or out there in front of an abortion clinic. It's kind of, or political. These are separate, but you kind of merge a lot of them together. But what was that like as a 29-year-old going to speak in a church of such reputation and well known as Jack Hibbs?
Yeah, that was that was October 2020, when Newsom was still, threatening to sue churches if they were open. And Pastor Jack had opened Calvary Chapel Chino Hills, I believe, in May. And then he put out a call to all California pastors to open on, I think, Pentecost Sunday, and to go back to normal on everything. And he did. And of course, his church, which was already large, exploded even more because people couldn't find a church that was open. And people really started seeing the true colors of a lot of their cowardly pastors. And so people were driving 1 to 4 hours to Calvary Chapel Chino Hills on Sunday mornings in 2020. And I've been speaking publicly, Peter, since I was 19, and full-time since 2014 when I graduated college. And so I lost my stage fright a long time ago, but I'd only spoken in front of groups of, 100 to 500, something like that. And then next thing you know, I meet Pastor Jack, and 29 years old, I'm speaking to, I don't know, 11,000 people between the 3 services that Sunday morning. And so that was kind of the turning point, actually, in mine and my family's life. Pastor Jack's become a mentor and a dear friend, and really the driving force behind the White Rose Resistance. And now we're the fastest growing pro-life organization in America. And we're only about 2.5 years old. This is our second full year as an operating ministry. And so, yeah, anyways, I always say Pastor Jack is the pastor that America needs but doesn't deserve, kind of like Batman. And if we had more pastors like that, we wouldn't be in the predicament that we're in here in America.
No idea, but it is exciting to see when God blesses individuals and organizations that are focused on him and doing what he wants. Chapter 1, you start with the history of the abortion movement, whitewashing the witch. And then a few lines from it. Abortion clinics are not unique in New York City, of course, but this health center is special. It's holy ground for those who uphold the sacrament of abortion as an integral part of their secular religion. This unassuming building houses the flagship clinic of Planned Parenthood, the world's largest purveyor of abortion on demand. For decades, the building was called the Margaret Sanger Health Center. Maybe start with that. Margaret Sanger, not a name that most people will know. And in the book, you talked about that being scrubbed because of her background. But she was there at the very beginning, the early 20th century. Again, most of us haven't really seen much written about her. You put this book and started with her. Why is she such a big part of the story of abortion in America?
Well, I mean, she's the mother of abortion. She's also been called the patron saint of feminism. I mean, we could take feminism a lot further back, of course, but in terms of impact and legacy and contribution to today's feminist movement and ideologies, Sanger would rank near the top. I've certainly found that a lot less people in America know who Margaret Sanger is, or even know the name, than I thought. That's probably even more so true in the UK. Although Sanger's most influential year or year and a half in the trajectory of who she would become was actually spent in the UK, was actually spent in England. But anyways, people in the church kind of, I think, have heard the name. They're like, is that Planned Parenthood or something? But the sort of the American layperson wouldn't really know who Margaret Sanger is. And yet it's hard to it's hard to overstate her legacy and impact on today's insane culture. My contention in the book, Peter, is that she's probably the most successful leftist revolutionary of the 20th century, whose fingerprints on today's insane culture are greater than any other weirdo that spawned out of the 20th century. Even Kinsey and Hugh Hefner, I'm saying that not even they could have been who they were if they were not already walking down a trail that Sanger had blazed for them beforehand. And so Margaret Sanger gets radicalized in 1911, 1912, 1913 in Greenwich Village, New York. Greenwich Village is also where the sort of second wave feminist movement would start in the late 60s. It's also where the homosexual movement and the Stonewall movement would start. Everything bad comes out of Greenwich Village, New York City. And so in the early 1900s, early 1900s, she begins attending these gatherings, leftists as they meet to drink alcohol and eat good food and plot how to tear down the fruits of Christianity and how to usher in basically a cultural Marxist revolution. They were basically all socialists and communists. They were part of the New York labor movement, and they were basically identical to what you would think of as a kind of purple-haired feminist majoring in lesbian dance theory at UC Berkeley in California. And it was in those gatherings that she sort of got radicalized. And then she begins to write, and she begins to spread her ideas about birth control. And although she didn't mean like helping poor minorities plan their parenthood, she meant birth control. We want to actually control what kinds of people are birthed. Okay, so people hear the phrase birth control, right, and they think like, oh yeah, just two couples, right? They just want to kind of control their fertility plans, right? No. The phrase was actually coined by Sanger. Birth control. Control is the key word in the phrase in birth control. So she was a eugenicist. But anyway, so she starts spreading her ideas and starts writing pamphlets that eventually get her in trouble with the Comstock laws, the anti-obscenity laws of that time, which basically said you can't send obscene, pornographic, illegal recommendations on contraceptives in the mail to people's homes. You can't do that. And so rather than get arrested, she ships her kids off to be raised by her friends. She has her socialist friends forge her a passport, and she flees to England, where she becomes like Kamala Harris. She too sleeps her way up the levers of power. H.G. Wells becomes a sexual partner. Many others, including a certain Havelock Ellis, who was sort of the Alfred Kinsey of England. And Havelock Ellis would host orgies in his home. He would force his wife to watch him as he participated in these entanglements. He himself was impotent, so he was always trying to experiment with new ways to get excited. And he begins a raging affair with Margaret Sanger. Havelock Ellis writes about his adulterous time in bed with Margaret Sanger in letters, forces his wife to read them, and eventually drives his wife insane. So these are the kind of people Sanger becomes fast friends with. And by the way, they would remain friends for life until Havelock Ellis's death. She went back to England multiple times to visit with him, probably sleep with him. He began publishing his articles in her birth control review, which was Planned Parenthood's magazine, sort of. And then while in England, she meets the Neo-Malthusians. She meets the Neo-Malthusian League, which refers to Thomas Malthus, and she was enthralled by these ideas. This idea that food production can't keep up with population growth. So eventually there's going to be a population bomb, and there will be mass starvation because there are limited, finite resources. But those people, they keep having kids. And so eventually this is going to be a problem for the world population. So this is where she becomes most heavily influenced in the sort of depopulation eugenicist ideals that would become the tone and tenor of Planned Parenthood when she returns to New York City in 1916 and opens up the first birth control clinic in the Brownsville neighborhood of Brooklyn, New York. That is, for all intents and purposes, Peter, the first Planned Parenthood clinic. But there's an interesting relationship, even through. There's an interesting tie between the individuals that formed and shaped Sanger that can be traced easily and through very few individuals, from Thomas Malthus straight to Margaret Sanger. It's very fascinating. And we really reveal a lot in this book. The movie is beautiful. It's also a movie, and I think it's absolutely beautiful. But the book goes a lot deeper. So this is quite shocking. And then I'll stop because I know you have other questions. But this helps people understand why Planned Parenthood operates the way that it does today, and why all of this history is connected to its legacy and culture today, why it still operates the way that it does. Sanger's sexual partner and adulterous affair and mentor, Havelock Ellis, who wrote over 100 books on every weird form of sexual experimentation. He was one of the first fathers of the free love movement, if you will, right? The predecessor even to Kinsey. Well, Havelock Ellis was mentored by Francis Galton. In fact, they exchanged letters for years. And Havelock Ellis told Francis Galton that he would do his best to push forward and advance the eugenic theories in his writings. Well, who was Francis Galton? Francis Galton was the father of the eugenics movement. In fact, he coined the term. So if you guys hear the word eugenics and you're thinking, oh, right, Hitler, Stalin, Mussolini, Mao Zedong, correct, that's all eugenics. But the guy who coined the stinking term, who invented the word, is Francis Galton. Eugenics means good in birth in the root word. So that means some people are not good in birth. so then the elites, they need to decide who gets to have kids and who doesn't, right? If you have good genes, you should have kids. If you have bad genes, we shouldn't let you have children. That's starting to sound a lot like Hitler. Well, Francis Galton had a half cousin. His cousin was named Charles Darwin. So we went from Darwinism and survival of the fittest, or man is an animal, right? So it's an animal kingdom. So survival of the fittest, the strong will survive and the weak will die. We went awfully quickly from survival of the fittest with Darwin to his cousin, Galton, who says we need the elimination of the unfit. We went from Darwinism to eugenics, not just awfully quickly, but within the same family. But Darwin had read Malthus's writings and was influenced by them and inspired him to write Origin of Species. So we went awfully quickly from the first father of the overpopulation movement, Thomas Malthus. Remember, who does Sanger meet in England? The Neo-Malthusian League. Malthusian. Thomas Malthus, Malthusian. It's the same dude. It's named after him. We went from Thomas Malthus, who was an English clergyman in the late 1700s when America was about 20 years old, to Darwin, to his cousin Galton, from too many people on planet Earth, to you're an animal, to eliminate the unfit, to Havelock Ellis, who's mentored by Galton, sexual orgy hosting weirdo, to Margaret Sanger, child sacrifice, and the founder of the largest, the best funded nonprofit in human history, the largest abortion provider in the world, the largest provider of the pornographic sexuality education in America's public schools, and the second largest provider of puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones. Well, that happened awfully quickly.
Okay, there's a lot to pick up on and where to go on that. It's at the beginning of the book, you have a quote from Hillary Clinton that she is in awe of Margaret Sanger and her work. Where does that kind of all come? Is that because it's mixed with feminism and therefore this is good for women? Let's forget about them killing 50% of abortions or women. Where is this absolute love affair from the left today, 100 years later, with this individual that started the first Planned Parenthood in 1916?
Well, yeah, it's because the goal has always been to free the libido, and to free women from the consequences of that libido, which is what? Birth and babies. It turns out consent to sex is consent to pregnancy, right? I mean, as much as the left screams, consent to sex is not consent to pregnancy, to which I always said, then consent to eating donuts for every meal for 5 years is not consent to obesity. But of course it is. There's an underlying relationship between the action that you're participating in and the conclusion. And it's fascinating that people can't even see that. Birth control, by the way, has convinced us that consent to sex is not consent to pregnancy, right? Because you're I'm on birth control, right? So I'm telling my body, you can't get pregnant. I'm not consenting to this because I did something to prevent it. And so look, I'm not trying to go all like super Catholic on everyone. I'm a Protestant, but I kind of respect the Catholic argument actually against birth control and what it's done to the cultural consciousness. It's ripped sex from its procreative telos, and therefore put the culture of death on steroids. And so when a woman gets pregnant, or a couple do, when they were, you were a condom, you birth control, you had the thing in your arm, right? And then you're that much more likely to kill the baby because you're like, I didn't consent to this human, right? I consented to orgasms, but I didn't consent to responsibility. I'm saying that Margaret Sanger is more responsible for that worldview, Peter, than anyone else in the 20th century. Here's what she wrote in her first magazine, Woman Rebel. What's the name of her magazine? She said, our ultimate objective is unlimited sexual gratification without the burden of unwanted children. End quote. So Woman Rebel, right? Our objective is orgasms without any responsibility. That's why Hillary Clinton loves Margaret Sanger. That's why the feminist movement loves Margaret Sanger today. That's why the left is enamored by her. Until 2020, post George Floyd, when BLM and 1619 Project people, notice I said 1619 Project, not my 1916 Project, as they're all canceling anything that they claim is racist. And then they attack Planned Parenthood, and then Planned Parenthood cancels Sanger in 2020, takes Sanger's name off of their New York City Planned Parenthood clinic. Anyways, but of course they continue to do the same things that Sanger founded the organization to do. They haven't removed their activities and their services. They just somehow discredited their founder. But until 2020, the left, by and large, had never dealt with the legacy and bigotry and racism and eugenics of Margaret Sanger for decades. They whitewashed the witch. They curated her legacy. They carefully managed it so that her more disturbing, nasty aspects wouldn't become common knowledge. And we're blowing the cover off and trying to make this stuff common knowledge so that people see how it's linked to today's progressive quote unquote ideologies and how absolutely damaging and deadly that they actually are, not just for the babies, but for the family unit as we know it and the culture by and large in America.
And at the beginning, you talk about the BLM movement and why that forced a change and that weird alliance between Planned Parenthood and BLM, which really logically should be opposites in one way, but they're aligned. And then in chapter 2, you talk about, you mentioned Hitler, you talk about the unholy trinity of depravity and death, and talk about Madison Grant's book, The Passing of the Great Race, was Hitler's Bible, published the same time as Planned Parenthood clinic opened. Tell us more about that. Are you just connecting dots that aren't there, or is there a link there and a web of deceit that lies behind it?
Yeah, there's always a web of deceit, Peter. There always is. So one of the things we tried to do with the book, and why I recommend people pick it up and read it, because it'll rip your face off and red pill you like nothing else ever, is we tried to show that when we talk about Planned Parenthood, we're not just talking about abortion. In fact, when you talk about the pro-life fight, you're not just talking about abortion. Now, I'm not telling pro-lifers to go fight every societal evil. I'm not telling pro-life organizations or individuals to somehow learn how to fight on every battlefront. He who fights everywhere fights nowhere, to quote Frederick the Great. Okay, we need to be narrowly focused in abolishing abortion. But you can't defeat an enemy that you don't understand, and you can't destroy an enemy that you don't know exists. If you don't understand that the Leviathan that you've been fighting has many different tentacles, then you won't understand the nature of the enemy that you're trying to destroy. And what I'm saying is that abortion is a symptom, a tentacle of a far sicker and more sinister beast. You can't deal with the killing of babies without dealing with the sexual revolution. And you can't deal with the sexual revolution without dealing with cultural Marxism. These people spoke openly about what their plans were and what they would do, and then they went and did it. And so one of the things we tried to do in the book, to answer your question, is to deal with the revolutionaries and their cohesion, their unity, and their battle plan from that era, rather than just saying, Margaret Sanger, mother of abortion, she's evil, Moloch, baby killing. Isn't that horrible? Yes, of course it's horrible. But like, I want to deal with what happened then, 100 years ago, with whatever happened. I don't want to just like carve Sanger out into a little lane and go, she's the reason we kill babies. Okay, but what was her motivation? Who was she working with? What were her organizational alliances? Who did she invite to publish in her papers? Why did she refer to herself as a eugenicist? Why did she publicly oppose abortion in that time frame? But secretly in her book, she was showing absolute disregard for prenatal life. What was her strategy? Why did she start with communist anarchism language and then later pivot to just focus on the phrase birth control? But she used to talk about like communism and socialist goals. What was the agenda? What was the goal, right? We have to deal with who these people really were and what their goals really were if we're going to understand today's culture of death. And so one of those individuals, one of the ways that we I think dealt with that history objectively rather than with subjective pro-life lenses of just don't kill babies lenses. One of the ways that we tried to deal with that was looking at the American Eugenics Society. Okay. And the American Eugenics Society was founded by Madison Grant, who was a friend of Margaret Sanger's. They fundraised together. They spoke at each other's conferences. They wrote for each other's publications. And Madison Grant, before he founded the American Eugenics Society, Peter, he had once put a black man in a cage with a monkey. You just heard that correctly, guys. He once put an African pygmy man in a cage with a monkey at the New York City Bronx Zoo to, quote, illustrate evolution. Madison Grant paid for and funded that thing. That man's name was Oda Banga, for those that want to fact check me. And Oda Banga later shot himself in the head and took his own life. And the zoo goers would mock him and point and laugh. Okay. So that's Madison Grant. Okay. And he becomes the founder of the American Eugenics Society. Well, his executive secretary, Leon Whitney, who wrote a book called Selective Sterilization, right? We need to be very selective about those that the state forcibly sterilizes, right? Because we have to protect the gene pool. We got to protect the good races, right? Yikes. Yeah. So Leon Whitney met with Sanger. They met together. They were friends. And Leon Whitney tried to convince Margaret Sanger, and she was very friendly towards this idea, to merge their two magazines, to merge her magazine, The Birth Control Review, with the American Eugenics Society's magazine and make them the same. Because he said, Sanger, we have the same goals. Margaret, we're doing the same things. Right? They saw their goals as one and the same. And so one day, Leon Whitney gets a letter from a German corporal recently out of prison and rising in the German political scene, thanking Leon Whitney for his writings on eugenics. And Leon Whitney got very excited, realizing that their work was now transcending American borders and boundaries, but was now influencing German intellectuals and politicians. And so he runs over to a committee meeting being led by his boss, Madison Grant, who put the black man in the cage with the monkey, and says, Madison, our writings are influencing the Germans. And Madison Grant, this comes from Leon Whitney's unpublished memoirs, that were later published, but he didn't publish them. And Madison Grant smiled and chuckled and pulled out his own letter he had just received from the same German corporal recently out of prison and rising in the German political scene, calling after his failed coup attempt in Munich, calling Madison Grant's book, The Passing of the Great Race, calling it his Bible. Well, the man who wrote those letters was named Adolf Hitler. So it's not as if Margaret Sanger and Adolf Hitler were pen pals, but I'll tell your audience this, it's almost that bad. It's almost that bad. So these were Sanger's friends. These were her financiers. These were her partners. Oh, and lastly, when Planned Parenthood was officially established in 1921, she shared office spaces with the American Eugenics Society.
Wow. Let me pay the Theological Roots of Evil, chapter 3. Before that, you give an indictment on the U.S. church. For too long, the church in America has been content to stay out of politics. We spend our time building ministries of mercy and 501c3s to care for the broken people who've been shattered by the crashing waves of progressive culture. We should have been fighting upstream against those ideas. And then at the end of chapter 4, you said, we are in a spiritual war, the root of which can be found in ideas. Just look around, ideas of consequences. And we are seeing the impact of very bad ideas. Just to warn you, you will need to have one of these as you read this, because there's so much information to underline that is so important to take in to understand the background of where we are. But the theological roots of evil, where does the church fit into this? Maybe even looking at this from a current situation in terms of the election, and the US church is a very different situation from the UK church. The UK church is afraid to even utter the word abortion or life,
right?
Lest they may offend some poor soul in the church. In the States, you seem to be bolder on actually calling this out, encouraging people how to vote, how to pray. But where does the church fit into this whole conversation?
Yeah, so it's crazy, Peter, when I hear you say that, because we feel like those on the front lines here, we feel like the church is so asleep and cowardly in America, and so to hear you say that it's even worse there, I guess is encouraging. I'm sorry. I guess it's encouraging that we're doing better here, but it also makes me go, wow, if I feel it's that bad and discouraging here, yikes. So anyways, what's my message to the church? I mean, all human conflict is ultimately theological. To quote Cardinal Henry Edward Manning, all human conflict is actually theological. All of these debates, all of these arguments, all of this conflict in the culture war in the West is really just a proxy war for a far deeper spiritual war. All of these ideas assume fundamentally religious principles and precepts, and that's because we're religious beings. I mean, we can't get away from that. We're spiritual creatures. We are a unity of body and soul, of physical and metaphysical, or of physical and spiritual. There's a unity there. The Bible talks about, like when I refuse to repent of my sins, my bones wasted away inside me, right? Like, so when I refuse to repent, that's a metaphysical, spiritual act. My bones ached, like my body hurt, like, oh, that's physical. So, I mean, and there's scientific things of this as well. Like when a mother nurses her baby, and the hormones that are released create a strong sense of trust and bonding. So a physical act creates a metaphysical bond of trust. So we are spiritual beings. We are both body and soul. And so we just can't get away from that fact. As much as we try to sort of liberate ourselves from our need for a God in the West, even crazy kooky leftists can't help but use religious language to attempt to describe their paganism. For example, Herbert Marcuse, who was one of the fathers of the free love movement in California, who, by the way, mentored Angela Davis, who mentored Patrice Kahlurs and Alicia Garza, the co-founders of BLM Incorporated. And Angela Davis also mentored Nicole Hannah-Jones of the 1619 Project. But Herbert Marcuse, who came from the Frankfurt School, he said the way back into the garden is to take another bite. of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It's like, wait. The way back into the garden is to defy God again, to disobey again, right? And so ever since Eden, man has been trying to get back into that garden, right? Into that sort of perpetual state of innocence. You could say every attempt, every agenda that the radical sexual revolutionary leftists have is a way to get back into Eden on our own terms.
Wow.
Explains, I think, so much of the culture war in America, Peter, is that whether it's the communists, right, trying to create a political utopia by obliterating the capitalists, from each from each according to their ownership, to each according to their need, right? It's like you'll own nothing and you'll like it, says Klaus Schwab at the World Economic Forum, right? Let's obliterate the bourgeoisie and let's the capitalists, and let's just all live like Elizabeth Warren, peaceful Indian warlords who pet squirrels, right? Or whether it's Sanger said, through sex, mankind may attain a spiritual illumination, which will transform the world and light up the only path to an earthly paradise. Whether it's through sex or it's through communism, whatever it is, it's always man's attempt to get back into Eden on their own terms. So can the church speak to that? I would think so. It's not political. Now, all of these things have political ramifications, and we have to fight on the political battlefield as well, of course, because laws matter, policies matter, because people matter. But is it fundamentally political? No, it's fundamentally theological. It's fundamentally biblical. When you talk about the family, marriage, babies, procreation, parental rights, those are our issues. That's our territory as the church, and it always has been. So we're simply asking the church, Peter, to reclaim their spiritual heritage and mantle of Christian resistance by engaging the entire culture before you with the full counsel of God, because the Bible and the scriptures speak to all of this. But if you'll only speak truth whenever it's comfortable or convenient for you, lest you lose the ties from your liberal left-wing congregants whose political sensibilities you don't want to offend, then you're not a pastor. You should go be a plumber. And you should find another job if you're not willing to disciple and equip the saints to do the work of the ministry.
Oh, completely. Let me ask, just to finish off, many books have been written on the issue of life, and you mentioned Scott Klusendorf, and we've had the privilege of having Scott on many times, and his Case for Life book certainly impacted me hugely. But this book is a very different book. In some ways, as I read this book, it's like you have a board up and you're connecting a lot of the things that have happened historically.
Well, we actually did that in the movie. We actually did a chalkboard and connected all the dots. And if you get the hardcover from us at the1916project.com, if you go to the1916project.com, which I'm sure you'll put in the notes, Peter, and you click buy the book, if you get it from us, it comes with an Easter egg timeline in the hardcover book that's a replication of the 3 chalkboards in the movie, where we actually connect the dots and explain how all this happened.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Seth, for coming on. It's a fascinating read and well worth for any of our viewers and listeners to get a copy. It's all in the description. The 1916 Project, the lion, the witch, and the war we are in. Thank you, Seth, for coming on and sharing your thoughts on such a fascinating, groundbreaking, I think, and well-written book.
Thank you, Peter. Appreciate you.